So please give a warm Georgia Tech welcome to our guest, Mrs. Hala Moddelmog.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you and good afternoon. I'm going to push my start button so that I don't talk longer than 30 minutes because once I start talking about the chamber, sometimes I get carried away. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen today. But thank you very much for having me. I really was pleased to get this offer. I kept saying to everybody, Georgia Tech is so good to the chamber, and it's just really so true. And somebody reminded me, well, Sam Williams, who was the person who had my job for 17 years, was a Tech grad. So that explains a little bit of it, but I really think really who you guys are as a people and the spirit of this place and the fact that you are probably the school we should be most proud of in this state is really the reason that we have such a good relationship and such a good connection. I'm going to tell you this afternoon a little bit about what the chamber does and a little bit about some things that are going on in the technology world that you may very well know about. So if you do, we'll kind of go through that quickly. Then talk a little bit about leadership, and then we'll save 30 minutes for questions at the end because really at the end of the day, I'd like to talk about what you want to talk about. But telling about a little bit about the chamber, we are really in place to do two things. One is to grow the economy. It's about economic development. And the other is about public policy that basically enables the economy. And if you think about everything that you need to, live and grow and have a place be all it can be, you've got to have the economic indicators to be, the way you need them to be to really grow, and you really need the public policy in place. And we were actually chatting a little bit earlier today. Georgia, is a wonderful state. Don't get me wrong. We're the #1 state for doing business. But we, from time to time, as you may have noticed, have our public policy challenges. Sometimes bills come up in the Georgia legislature that are anti-business. And so that puts us in a little bit of a precarious situation, but it's just true. And so as a business community, sometimes we have to stand up and express our dismay at some of that. And then on the positive hand, if there are things that we need to push in public policy, things like transportation, which is one of the biggest issues here, then we try to go with a positive plan to get that fixed. And we are, as you well know, one of the worst in terms of transit. There's a little bit of transit around here, but nothing like what we need and nothing like what's growing up in the other parts of the country. For instance, in Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, the same time we got MARTA here, they got their systems for transit. They now have full-blown transit systems. In D.C., you wouldn't think of having a car. You wouldn't think of having an office building anywhere near without transit. San Francisco the same way, but in Atlanta, we stopped in just 2 counties, and we really haven't done ourselves any favor. So on the positive side, that's some of the more proactive, positive things that we're working on. The next one here is innovation and entrepreneurship, and I know that is what most of you in the room are dedicated to, and you're going to probably know a lot more about it than I do. But one thing I want to tell you about that we're really excited about at the Chamber, we have just completed, and we haven't actually published it yet, but an innovation indicators report. Because we know that, again, the Atlanta region has a lot of really great things for technology and for innovation and for entrepreneurship. And again, we've got professors here who know a lot about that. You're probably taking courses on it. I know Paul Judge is in the audience, and he pushed out, online overnight one night, I think it was 93 pages about just how great we have it here, the numbers and how big it is for us, the startups and all that kind of thing. And that is all really wonderful and exciting. But if you really look really deeply across our region and what we have and what we don't have, and when you look at us and compare us to Austin, San Diego, Boston, a handful of other places like that we chose, there are definitely some gaps that we have. So what we're trying to do at the Chamber is see what those gaps are for innovation and for entrepreneurship and anything we need for startups, and what are the areas that we at the Chamber can uniquely fill in the gaps for. We know that capital is sometimes an issue. We know that sometimes keeping the talent here is sometimes an issue. Sometimes some of you wonderful people get your degrees here and then you leave Atlanta. We want to make sure you stay here. We want to make sure that there are jobs that you want to do here. We want to give you the infrastructure for startups. So there are some things that we can do. We've got to figure out what those are and design programs around them. So this is kind of what we're doing in the innovation and entrepreneurship area. So it's really a lot more to come on that later. And then this quality of life and core infrastructure is really what I talked about with public policy. That is something that we do in a very big way. We advocate, as a matter of fact, I'll just give you an example that is very germane to educators. As we all know, and especially in bioscience and areas like that, the R&D dollars that were going to NIH and NCI and to colleges and universities has really been a lot less over the last few years than it had before. So with the chambers in Boston and some of the other places, we have gotten together and are lobbying the federal government to make sure that we get federal dollars for the kinds of things that we need. The other thing that we're lobbying the federal government on is immigration. We know that some of you sitting in the audience probably might like to stay here with us, but instead of, stamping a green card to your diploma and keeping you here with us, that's not exactly what we have going on in our country. So anyway, we're trying to fight the good fight to make sure there are more jobs here and that we can help everybody kind of take a rise up out of that. And then we're going to tell our story. One of the things that I do think we are missing in Atlanta is really what is that narrative. I mean, my background, I feel a little uncomfortable standing in front of all of you guys, is liberal arts. And it really is marketing and strategy is kind of the area that I grew up in. And when you're going to have a marketing pitch that you're going to do to somebody, it really needs to go way beyond just features and benefits, because we've got reams of paper and gigabytes of data about all the wonderful features and benefits that we have for our region. But, people will only remember so many of those, and they'll remember the ones that are important to them. But when you really want to capture someone's imagination or capture their hearts or capture a part of their belief system that works for you, and to really get to the ethos, the DNA, the purpose, the why of why something is there, then you really have to understand, what we're talking about and how to talk to people emotionally and how to tell a story. So we're in the midst of doing a very large ethnographical research study right now with people all over the Atlanta region. And it's people from Andy Young, who everybody knows, to some young woman in Gwinnett County that nobody knows her name, and it doesn't matter what her name is because she's part of the region, and her values and her belief systems are important to this region as well. And we're very diverse here. We're excited to have a diverse economy. We should be very happy about that. And kind of tying all this back in, the people who kind of pay my salary and have the chamber be able to operate are really the 16 Fortune 500 companies that we have in Atlanta. And I mention that because we're fortunate to have that kind of group and have that kind of base here. And the other reason we're fortunate about that is because when you come out with an innovation here, a startup here, if you're trying to be an entrepreneur in this country, in this area, then you've got somebody to connect with. We've got, again, this diverse economy and a ton of really big, large potential customers. And, we're always being compared to Austin, and I know they're so cool, and I know South by Southwest is so much fun, and that's really cool, and we're trying to be cool ourselves, and we haven't gotten there yet. But if you go to a cocktail party in Austin or a beer fest or whatever they're doing, you're a young tech company, you're going to be talking to other big tech companies. If you go to these kinds of events here, we're going to be delivering to you, again, 16 Fortune 500, many thousand Fortune 1000 companies who can be customers of yours. They're not necessarily technology companies, and they are dying to have your ideas, and they want to know about your technology, and they want you to have your innovation, and they don't know this, but they actually do want parts of their businesses disrupted, but they want to disrupt them themselves and take that next step. So anyway, that's kind of what MAC does in a big overall kind of way. We do have an innovation economy here. You guys probably know these things, again, better than I. but a lot of tech companies in the last 3 to 5 years, over $1 billion in Georgia. We probably got a lot of this stuff out of your deck, Paul. Top 10 metro for IT workers, top 10 city to launch a startup in, Atlanta Tech Village. We have an office there. Yes, we are trying to be cool, although we're still old. And then we have all those tech startups that you can see there and the VC funding and all the things going on here. So, we're really proud. And again, these are numbers and things that we give out, but we really have to have a narrative to go with it. This is probably, though, my favorite slide because although I talk a lot about, those really big companies, like your Cokes and Home Depot and Delta and the ones that you can sell your technology to and help them with mobility and everything, on the other hand, we have an incredible group of companies in the tech space that are truly fueling our economy. And one of the pieces of data that has come out from, I think, the Komen Foundation is that in terms of true net new jobs in this region and in this country, and they're going to come from companies over the next 5 years, companies that are 5 years old or younger. So when we look at these big companies, as you guys well know, because we've all, seen it and some of us have experienced it and lived through it and frankly done it, the big companies are usually trying to shrink to increase their productivity and get their costs down, while some of these companies that are growing, truly growing, are where the new jobs are going to, or the net new jobs are going to come. But we, the fintech piece, some people say 60%, some say 70%. To have, Jeff Sprecher own own the New York Stock Exchange is really a cool thing for this city, and he's a great friend to the chamber. He wants to be involved in things. The mobile technologies, we just had the last couple of days something called the GSMA, and GSMA is a conference that happens in Barcelona every first of the year, I think January, February. They have over 80,000 participants there. The GSMA just decided this year for the first time that they were going to have that conference and do it on a regional basis. And so they chose 4 places: Dubai, Brussels, Cape Town, and Atlanta, Georgia. And so we were very pleased that they see Atlanta as North America's hub for mobility. So we had the GSMA conference on Monday and half of Tuesday, and then Tuesday and today we had our own conference that we dreamed up with AT&T and a few other people called Mobility Live. So we really are trying to push that part of the economy. And of course, you guys know all about health IT. We're the nation's health IT capital. Cybersecurity. I love Alan DeBerry, and I know he loves this school. John Marshall is a graduate of here, and every time I see him, he says, "I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to do it in Atlanta." He was Manhattan Associates, sold that. He just sold AirWatch to VMware for $1.5 billion, and we call that a pretty good exit, and I think he does too. But seriously, every time I see him, he just says to me in all sincerity, "I'm going to do this again. Twice is not enough, and I'm going to do it in Atlanta because you've got what it takes here, you've got the talent here, and you've got things that really do support us." So I really like hearing something like that from Alan DeBerry. So it should make us all feel good about your future jobs and about the city. Okay, so Georgia Tech, you guys are just the best in this. Usually when I go give a speech, I won't do this to you since you're here and you are at Georgia Tech. I talk a lot about all the wonderful things that that really happen here, and that we, again, good bragging rights for us. So your part in the ecosystem. So innovation and leadership. It's interesting. The part that I want to talk about, and I talked to one of your professors earlier, and we talked about, I think this is a leadership series, and I know you've had some other people to talk about leadership, but one of the specific areas that I did want to mention is truly about risk-taking, and obviously you can't be an entrepreneur if you're not willing to take a risk, so it's almost it's axiomatic in this context, and so really it's what I really want to talk about more is the confidence gap that's going on. So you'll have to forgive me for the men in the room for just a few minutes. But there's a recent study done by Katty Kay of the BBC, and who's the other woman? I've forgotten already. Claire Shipman. And they wanted to understand, risk-taking in terms of men versus women. And, they had a suspicion that there was truly a confidence gap between men and women in leadership roles and that kind of thing. And this was, to me, just a very sad commentary, but I didn't find it totally shocking. And that was the other thing that made me even sadder about it. And that is that when men have an opportunity to take a new job, to ask for promotion, to do anything where they have this new opportunity, they are willing to raise their hand to do it and to say yes if they have about 60% of the competencies. But women, on the other hand, tend to not raise their hand and say they're ready to go unless they have almost 100% of the competencies. So I see that as a big problem for the world. Okay, so forget about men versus women. But if women are 50% of the world and you've got 50% of that group not willing to raise their hand and go out and take that risk, then that's a problem. So this is one of the things that I've been talking about in my speeches lately, and it kind of brings it back to a little bit of my maybe leadership philosophy, which is not super profound at all, but basically what I say is you really just almost just have to have the nerve to do something. And again, I do think that goes in, mixes in well with entrepreneurship and that kind of thing. But when I was in my 30s when I was asked if I wanted to be interviewed to be the president of Church's Chicken, and I'm like, well, heck yeah, I do. Why wouldn't I? I mean, it was like okay, they had their bevy of men that were being interviewed, but it was like this big thing, because I was a mother of 2 little small children then and all this. So it was like asking me, which I thought was odd as well, but I'm like, sure. So anyway, at the end of the day, I got the job, and the reason I mention this is because I probably had only about 30% of the competencies that were needed for that job. I mean, I knew marketing. I understood the P&L, because you can't, in my mind and anybody's mind, really do good marketing if you don't understand the P&L and knows how it flows all the way through to the bottom line if you're really going to make money on that revenue that you drive. But, I didn't know real estate. I didn't know HR. I didn't have an MBA. Really didn't know the balance sheet that well because I never had to. I mean, I could kind of go on and on. Operations, which is certainly key when you are, in the restaurant business. But there were just all these things that I really didn't have a clue about. But I figured, hey, I'll learn them on the job. I'll hire people who are smarter than I am and just go make it happen. And so as we've been, looking a little bit at entrepreneurship and innovation, really, if people, in your seats, and I hope I'm not saying anything that the professors have proof against, but anyway, this is just kind of my view. But if you're sitting there and you're thinking about doing something innovative or being an entrepreneur, if you waited until you had every single competency, you'd never get anything done. I mean, it's just not the way the world works. So for me, a lot of leadership is just about having the nerve to go do it. Taking that chance on what you believe in, what you have a passion around, and then hiring really smart people to be with you. So anyway, okay, so this is Terry Lynn put this in here, not me, but this is a little bit about my career. I mean, I did start out being the president of Church's Chicken for about 10 years. I was there for about 12. I was VP of marketing for 2, and then president for 10. And then from there, I actually went to Susan G. Komen for the Cure, which is a nonprofit organization. And the interesting thing about not running a nonprofit versus a for-profit, I often get asked, what's the difference? And really, at the end of the day, the fundamentals aren't that different. I mean, it's still about raising all the revenue you can and, putting those proceeds to the highest and best use. And, it's just really not that different. I mean, leadership is basically the same. The teams you put together are the same. The back office systems are really the same. So it's just not that different from that standpoint. But one area that truly is different is that, when you wake up, in a nonprofit and you know what your mission is. I mean, it's just not a big mystery. If you work for Susan G. Komen for the Cure, your mission is to eradicate breast cancer and or at least decrease the mortality rate. And, frankly, when we were there, we put together this really incredible group of scientific advisors, and these were physician scientists who are totally my heroes. But I asked them, early on, because I really wanted to have a goal that we could really, see through in terms of saving lives. And I said, are we going to, find a cure in the next 5, 10, even 20 years? And these are very, smart people, very grounded in the research and very much knowing what was on the horizon. And so they never were not able to say to me that they thought really, frankly, in our lifetimes that we would find a cure. But what they thought we could do, and so it's what we worked on, was just decreasing the number of people who die from breast cancer. So, and that's really kind of what's happened over the last few years. It's not that fewer people are getting it, and it's not that there is a cure, but we are trying to ease down that group of people who actually die from the disease. So after Komen, I came back to Atlanta, and I did the for-profit world again. And as was mentioned in my introduction, thank you, I was the president of Arby's Roast Beef for about 3.5 years. And both churches and Arby's were, without a doubt, a total turnaround. And although a lot of you are young in here, you probably do remember September 15th, 2008, when Lehman Brothers went down. Or if you don't remember with that specificity, you do know that 2008 and 9 and 10 were really, really hard on business and thus on people and the world and the U.S. So the Arby's brand lost almost 20 to 25% of its top line during those years. And, if you know anything about business, you know that if you lose a quarter of your business in the top line, and you know that margins are really thin, it's a penny profit business, it's really hard to get anything to the bottom line. So that's the shape that Arby's was in when I went there. And Church's was really sort of in that shape. It was just a brand who hadn't been taken care of in a long time. So I had gotten this reputation as a turnaround artist or a transformation person, because now there were two brands that needed that kind of attention. And really, again, it's kind of back to the same thing. You just kind of have to have the nerve to do it. You've got to understand what your burning platform is. If your hair needs to be on fire, and there are people in your organization who have forgotten that your hair needs to be on fire and that their hair needs to be on fire and that there is a sense of urgency, you've got to rally the troops again. And really, at Arby's, that was a little bit of a hard task, because the people had been working there with 4 years of a downturn, and winning feels good. I mean, it really does. I think we all understand that. Making good grades feel good. Meeting your goals feel good. So we had to really try to re-energize everybody. And this kind of brings me a little bit back to the nonprofit versus the for-profit. Again, a lot of similarities when you're running the organizations, but a lot more difficulty in really finding a true mission when you're in a for-profit. And again, that kind of goes back to this ethnographical research we're doing to try to really market our own region. But at Arby's, when I got there, again, things were in pretty bad shape, and really the people were in pretty bad shape, because again, losing is no fun, and they've been losing for about 4 or 5 years. But so we had to find out, why we existed and what we were going to do that we could be really proud of besides just making money. And believe me, it was a public company at the time I went there. Then we were bought out by private equity. So there were a lot of people interested in us making a lot of money. And that was my job, and I was devoted to do it. But I also knew that we couldn't really rally the troops unless we had some kind of mission, some kind of something extra that we were doing. So we looked at ourselves and we said, okay, so what's very fundamental to what we're doing? What's very fundamental to what we were doing was feeding people. So, could kind of go without saying, and maybe you could say that this mission could be for any food brand, but nobody else had chosen it. So we said, what can we do that can get us passionate about what we're doing and make sure that we get to be the ones to carry this out? And we ended up on childhood hunger, because at the same time that the Arby's brand had been suffering for 4 or 5 years, from 2008 through 2010 and 11, children in America started experiencing a lot more food insecurity. When we first started, before 2008, there were 1 in 6 children in America who were food insecure. And food insecure doesn't mean that you're starving, but it does mean that you don't necessarily know where your next meal is coming from. And by the time we got to the 2008 through 10 or 11 era, there were 1 in 5 kids in America who were food insecure. So we knew there was this enormous need. And frankly, since our headquarters were here in Atlanta, we wanted to take a deeper look at Georgia. And in Georgia, right now, today, 1 in 4 children are food insecure. And it's just it's a bigger problem than I think you'd think. But so we worked with this group called Share Our Strength, which works on No Kid Hungry. And we just kind of rallied ourselves around what can we do to feed these children. And if you think about kids that are in school who have free and reduced lunch. So most of them, and there are about 22 million in the country who have free and reduced lunch, most of them will also be eligible for free and reduced breakfast. But they don't like to go into the lunchroom in the mornings for their free or reduced breakfast, because that's like raising a hand and saying, my parents can't feed me, I don't have the food. So there are a lot of kids that weren't taking advantage of that breakfast. So one of the programs that we have helped fund and there still are, Arby's is still doing this. I'm very, very proud. We've raised literally millions and millions of dollars for this program. But one of the programs that some of the teachers agreed to do is to take the breakfast into the classroom for the first 10 minutes of the classroom, and they would feed it to all the children, so that nobody was called out to be the person who wasn't getting, what didn't have enough money to eat. And at first the teacher said, no, we don't want to do that. We're trained to be teachers. We don't want to clean up spilled milk. We're not, that's not what we trained to do. But once they experimented with it, it turned out to be a wonderful thing. I mean, at first it was just better attendance. Then it was fewer health problems. Then there was less distraction, less putting heads down on the desk, and eventually there have been enough schools who have done it now that eventually it translated to better grades. So we were, very proud of that work. And then I'll just say one other quick thing. Let's say you have a child who's food insecure, and they get free lunch and breakfast at school. So what do you think happens to them in the summer? So it's really a big gap in the summer. So that's another area that we really worked on to say that we could come and feed those kids. And I mention all this to say that, no matter what you're doing, if you've got a passion around the business or the technology or whatever you invent, and your passion is really there, then that's great. If you find yourself in a business that you have to kind of attach something to it to get your people revved up about it, to make sure that you really are, doing something that you think will matter in the world, maybe beyond making money, then that's a big part of leadership. I mean, a lot of times we just, we kind of measure people by their numbers or their titles or whatever they, can kind of pull together. But at the end of the day, I think we all want to feel as though what we're doing every day really matters. And so I'll bring that back to my last job and get this silly thing down. And that is that working at the Metro Chamber, I feel like we are doing something every day. And I feel like we're doing something every day to drive the economy in this region. I know we're working on things from a public policy standpoint. That's okay, because I don't have any more slides. Okay, thanks. So I know that we're doing things, and I know that we're doing things that matter. And the other thing, and I'll just end on this and take questions, when I first came to the Chamber because I had been working in the for-profit world, and one thing you probably know about the nonprofit world is they don't really pay very much money. So I was like, okay, when you're looking at your next thing, you're either going to go someplace and try to make some money again, or you're going to go someplace that you really believe that what you do can make a difference. And as I looked at the Metro Chamber job, I had to really analyze it to see, if I thought we really could move the needle. And I will tell you that I believe that we can, but it really is going to take so much people like you in the room to do it, because we can't do just what we've always done. We can't just measure the number of jobs we create and the number of members we have. We have to really get more sophisticated and break it down and look at GDP and say to ourselves, which parts of GDP can we actually drive? And we have to make sure we understand, back to the innovation and entrepreneurship piece, which pieces of that can we truly affect with our unique connections and with the money that we're funded with from these gigantic companies around this region. And at the end of the day, if we can do all of that really well, I believe that we will end up eventually helping homeless people. And I'm pointing to you, because not that she's not homeless, she's a person who works with the homeless. But my point is this, I'm sorry, that was really silly, excuse me. Anyway, the point is, and I know this phrase gets overused, the whole rising tide, all boats and all that kind of thing, but we've got to start someplace. So if we can really drive the economy up here, we can really get things going with you guys from a startup perspective, and we really do the right thing from a public policy standpoint, I do believe that our state, we don't have to have 1 in 4 kids food insecure, and we don't have to have some of the educational systems that we have in some of our areas, and some of the things that we have now that we know can be better. It doesn't have to be that way. So anyway, that's my reason for doing this, and again, I thank you for your time today.
Okay, we're going to open up for questions now. Let me start one, just while the rest of the students are thinking. Actually, it's about one of the last comments. That relates to the food insecurity issue. And what I'm wondering about is that for a business like Arby's, it doesn't seem like that particular activity, social activity, would be that central to the Arby's core business, Arby's strategic mission. And one of the things that we talk about in corporate social responsibility programs is that if these programs aren't central to the business's strategy, then the organizations tend to lose interest, or they don't tend to persist in these programs, particularly when they go into economic downturn. So I'm really wondering, in terms of Arby's, in terms of manufacturing something to get interested in, to get your employees fired up, could you pick something that's more central or more strategic to the business rather than something that is important but not that important to Arby's as a business?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with your point. I mean, whatever you're doing really does need to be, central and core to the business. But this is the way we thought about this. A couple of things. Arby's had a foundation before I got there, so it wasn't that I invented Arby's giving money away to help people. Not at all. There was a foundation, and that foundation was giving most of their money to Big Brothers and Big Sisters. And that's a great organization. But what would happen in the restaurants, and you end up raising most of your money in the restaurants because it's basically getting the consumers engaged with whatever you have going on, A, to raise money, and B, to make them truly feel like they're doing something to help through your brand. So people didn't understand necessarily why you needed money for Big Brothers, Big Sisters. They would say things like, well, I thought those people volunteered. And you would get into this long kind of conversation with them at the checkout counter, or they really wouldn't give that much, and it just got to be kind of an issue. And the passion for our group was kind of gone from that because they had been doing it for a long time. But when you have data about a hungry child, it communicates right away. And I actually think that it is central to the business mission. I mean, any of the food brands, of course, but Arby's were feeding people, good products for a good price, and they knew, and our franchisees knew, that people in their backyard in their own community weren't even able to eat. So I think when you have a customer there who's spending their money going out to eat, taking their family out to eat, and they see a message about a hungry child, there is a connection. So it really did resonate for us. And I'll tell you the other thing that our franchisees would do, and we do these kinds of things sometimes at the restaurants to get the customers involved, but there's something called the backpack program. And again, and so that the child would not feel embarrassed on the weekends, the No Kid Hungry people, and one of the things that we funded was to fill up backpacks that the kids could take home on Fridays filled with food for the weekend, and it looks like you're taking your books home. So there are a lot of ways to get the consumer engaged, and it was just such an easy read, because after the recession hit, frankly, people believed that there were hungry children in America, and I think maybe they didn't even believe it before. But it's a good point.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for coming. So you talked about kind of being known as the turnaround artist. I was wondering if you thought there was a particular leadership style that you used that made you so effective in turning around these brands that kind of had fallen under the way.
I don't know exactly if there's any, kind of one style, but part of the issue with both of these brands is that, and especially with churches, and really with Arby's as well, is when I got to the brands, besides the numbers just being in the hole, the relationships with the franchisees were broken. And you can imagine if you're a franchisee and because franchisees were some of the original entrepreneurs, and they may not sound very entrepreneurial to you guys because it wasn't as though they invented something new, but these were some of the first, Americans who went out and said, I want to have a business of my own, and here's a business model that I can do, and it's trillions of dollars. In Atlanta, as a matter of fact, it's like the franchise capital of the world. But anyway, so you can imagine if you're a business owner and you've got absolutely everything into that business, and all of a sudden the bottom falls out from a sales perspective and obviously from a profit perspective. Some of these people were losing their business. Some of them had, I kid you not, there were gigantic systems. Chicago was one of them, where they had levered themselves up 13 times. Because remember, in 2008, we were coming off that easy money where they could just get leveraged up like crazy. So some of the second generations levered themselves up. So then they were in dire straits, when the economy went south. So by the time a brand really starts to fall down from a profitability standpoint, the relationships really get frayed. So if there's one thing that I maybe brought to the party, was trying to work on relationships with the franchisees, and it really was not hard at churches at all, because Al Copeland, who is the inventor of Popeyes from Louisiana, had bought churches and had just used it as a little bit of a cash cow from the cash he could get. He had taken all of the good locations and converted them to Popeyes. And you can imagine he was the true entrepreneur with Popeyes and invented that brand. And it was him, and it was a great brand and still is, et cetera, et cetera. But then he buys this little church's brand and just basically abuses it, just takes the cash out, ignores the franchisees, flips the restaurants that he wants to be Popeyes, and leaves that brand with hardly nothing. So you can imagine that if you walk into that situation and you treat the franchisees of the church's brand with respect, you treat the employees with respect, you prove that you know how to market the brand. So really, if there's one thing I would say, it was about building those relationships. And really the same thing at Arby's. When I got there, those guys were on their last leg and nerve about, how much more their business could take. And they really just want somebody to listen to them. And then they want to know, again, that you can drive their top line for them, because in franchise world, You got to be able to drive their top line for them, and you got to do their marketing, and then let the dollars flow. So, long way to say, I think the leadership lesson for me is about building the relationships and gaining that trust and being able to get them to follow you with your programs. And if they like you and they trust you and you've proven a few things with the numbers a couple of times, they will pretty much follow you.
We have a question back here.
I'm sure you've studied the scene when you came on the job and done your own analysis of what Atlanta needs. But have you focused on it from the perspective of the wealth gap? So much of the chamber activity, getting new business and this type of thing, focuses on exacerbating the wealth gap. Have you focused on the bottom of the pyramid?
Well, it kind of goes back to my comments about, that I have to believe that a lot of the things that we are doing for the big companies and the startups and helping to scale and grow people will eventually trickle down and help the bottom tier come up. And if I didn't believe that, it would be a very kind of sad kind of job, because we do have, I think we unfortunately have the distinction in this region of having the largest wealth gap of any big metropolitan city. And so we must focus on that. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, back to your point, is we're trying to, grow the economy through getting jobs to move here, getting companies to move here, getting various types of jobs, high-paying jobs, but also low-paying jobs. And the part that I didn't talk about in my comments that we have a whole program on from a public policy standpoint, and a separate program, is workforce development. Because as we all know, there's still, a ton of gaps between the jobs that are needed and the people needed to fill them. And I'll just give you one quick example, and that's welding. And I know we've all heard that one, but it's a really easy one. We don't have enough welders here. We've got scholarship money that we know we can get from the government, that we know we can get from various places, to put somebody through an absolute complete welding program, and then they can come out and make $75,000 a year. So we're working on those workforce gaps. We're working at the high level, making sure people like you don't leave so that we can fill jobs here, and then we're working at the lower levels as well. So if we influence that, hopefully from growing the GDP in general, and from a public policy standpoint, and specific programs on workforce development, I really do believe that we can make a difference in that area.
We have a question on this side.
Hello.
Hi.
You spoke about the confidence gap. Is there anything that the Chamber is doing specifically to bring more women, business owners, and entrepreneurs into the city?
There's not a specific program. It's interesting, and I don't think you'll find this a total surprise, but since I am the first woman to run the chamber in 154 years, since the whole time it's been in existence, go figure. But anyway, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because I'm going to talk about this confidence gap, and I'm going to talk about the needs that women have. I'm just going to do it. And I've given a ton of speeches on it. And frankly, I get invited to do speeches because I'm the Metro Chamber person. I get invited to do speeches because I'm the new Metro Chamber person. And I get invited to do speeches because I'm a woman, period, in business. So, but again, when I go back to the double-edged sword, I also have to be very careful that I don't become the female CEO of the Metro Atlanta Chamber, because that doesn't do women any good, and it doesn't do anything. So it's not like I'm going to run out and do a ton of new programs for this, but it's on our screen. It's certainly, I've always been able to hire from a diversity lens. I did that at churches way back before people dreamed it up, because I was trying to match my customer base, my franchisee base, because it just made good business sense. And I knew, you just kind of know intuitively, that diversity of thought and having men and women on your team is a good thing. So, but we don't have anything yet is kind of the short answer. And I'm not sure exactly what we will do, except just every chance we get, make sure we are lifting people up through Small Business Person of the Year, and some of the award things that we do, and making sure we can get some women into our innovation and entrepreneurship program once we get that up and running.
You talked about innovation and keeping the talent in Georgia, especially for people going to college and universities in Georgia. And I know Georgia Tech has an innovation competition called Inventure Prize. Have you thought about at least doing a networking purposes with the students who compete in that competition, or like trying to increase the amount to not just Georgia Tech but other colleges and universities as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually one of the bigger issues that I see that we have, that I'm not sure exactly how we're going to work this through, but I think we have to. Let's be real. I think the model of a regular chamber, so to speak, is not exactly a 21st century kind of thing. And so I think we have to reform and transform what we do in order to meet the needs that you just described, because just doing what we do now is not going to work. Because you're not going to have any interest in coming to the types of networking events that we have right now. And frankly, there's not a whole lot that we're doing at this point that you'd truly be interested in participating in. We've been very lucky, frankly, though, that a handful of people have joined the chamber board. David Cummings as a member, Mark Gilreath, Jeff Hillemeyer, some of those guys who, and Alan DeBerry, David DeBerry, those guys who've been very successful have definitely joined us. But we have to change who we are in order to connect with you and make sure that we really are working on that. And one thing that we do have at the chamber that we're very proud of, and Tech has been a huge supporter of this, is something we call, business higher ed. It's one of our initiatives, and we've been working with the universities to try to figure out basically, how to make sure to take the technology or the professors or the students with technology, from the university and connect them with our businesses, and kind of vice versa. And we've had some success with it, but I think there's a whole lot more that can be done. And a couple of things that have come out of that program. One is this innovation indicators study that I mentioned that talks about where the true gaps are with entrepreneurs and innovation here. And another is something we call the iNav. It's an intern navigator. Now, probably people at Georgia Tech, you probably don't really need this that much, because companies are coming for you for internships and for co-ops and that kind of thing. But a lot of the other colleges and or smaller businesses, let's say you don't want to go work at Coke, you'd rather work at a Fortune 1000 who's trying to scale or something like that. Those companies don't have the tools or the time to go out and find a great college student to be an intern. So we've set up this portal and given them the tools to put out what they would like to get, and then we have a ton of colleges and universities in the area who are signed up on the other side. And we've got probably over 100 new internships that may not have happened without our navigator. So we're doing a few things, but I think it's up to us to make the changes to where it would be meaningful for you to want to, be with us.
Yeah, Hala, you talked about how your leadership philosophy is to have the nerve to do something. And I'm wondering if you could give us a time in which you had the nerve to do something, but maybe it didn't work out so well, in which it kind of crashed and burned maybe, and potential lessons from that.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I hate to sound like I'm in an interview and I say, oh, my greatest strength is my perseverance. So, I don't know. I'm sure you guys maybe you get coached on how to interview. It's funny because, I don't know, I'm a very optimistic person. Okay, so I feel like almost everything, taking the president job at churches really was a leap. Let's just say, no doubt about it. And, frankly, taking the job at Komen was a leap, because I'd never done nonprofit. I sure as heck didn't want to live in Dallas, Texas, but I did. And, you know, I never raised money like that. I've been on a bunch of nonprofit boards and all that kind of thing. But, and then taking the Arby's job, I actually had people say to me, wow, well, I guess you're going to take that Arby's job because if it doesn't work out, then people will say, oh, that brand was down the tubes, it's okay. And if it works out, you know, you'll be a hero or whatever. And then I really probably have the nerve taking this job because I've never done economic development. I've not done a lot of public policy. But I just feel as though, you know, if I, you know, give everything to it, and again, you've got to hire really smart people, and you've got to be strategic, and you've got to know what you're trying to get accomplished. And it's not that I haven't ever failed. I mean, plenty, but, you know, in terms of kind of the big things, I don't know, you just go out there and make it happen. And I don't sit around with any regrets, you know? I mean, I better think of a better answer to that question. But that's all I can come up with today.
Well, like you said, it's not an interview.
No, it's not an interview. I don't know, maybe it is. I don't know. Yeah. All right.
I have a question. To the extent that the Metro Chamber is successful, you have business growth and you attract more businesses, which means that there's more traffic pressure, more infrastructure pressure. So how do you balance or align sustainable infrastructure policy with business attraction so that the quality of life for the people already here doesn't go down and they don't leave, and that it's always, you know, chasing after?
Yeah. That's a really great question. And I talked about transit a little bit at the beginning, but I will tell you this, and it pains me to say it, but the number one issue that our board has chosen to work on at the Chamber this coming up year is transportation. And it really is for the very reason that you say, because it's not just transit, you know, that we're behind in. You know, I gave the comparison to D.C. and San Francisco. If we had not been, you know, let's just say it, racist back in the day when we started it, and, you know, only Fulton and, you know, DeKalb would allow transit, and the other counties wouldn't even allow it. If we hadn't been like that, we'd be in a different place today. But we're not in a different place. So we've got the transit issue. And then we have transportation issues. And so, you know, here is the thing. You're going to have congestion in any large city. So, you know, that's never going away. But we spend 48th out of 50 on transportation per capita. So you know how when we talk about we're 48th in education, K through 12 in Georgia, well, we're just as bad in transportation. So we've got a real problem here, and it's going to take a lot of leadership coming from either the governor, the speaker, the House, or the Senate. And so you've really framed it well. It's like, okay, so wow, education, growing business, technology, whatever, how can transportation be your number one issue? But it almost has to be, because it does get us into that just non-virtuous circle, because it really does affect everything we do, and it does drive some people out. So what's going on right now is there is a 16-person joint study committee that has been set up by the legislature. There are 5 senators, 5 House representatives, and then 6 citizens that have been appointed. And I am one of the citizens that have been appointed. This is not the first time that our state has done a joint study on transportation. They did one a few years ago. So many people are very cynical about this. They're like, okay, you've done that before. But I must say that what I've heard so far, people are serious about trying to do something and fix it, because people seem to know where we are, you know, by and large. So what we're doing is we're going around to 8 cities in Georgia. We started here in Atlanta. We're doing Savannah, Columbus, Macon, Augusta, Blue Ridge, Rome, Tifton. I think that's 8. So we're going all over the state and listening to people to find out what their problems are. And one of their, I mean, the problems range from, you know, what we've talked about in transit to a place in, you know, down near Tifton where they can't drive the school bus over a bridge because the bridge is so in such disrepair that the school bus, it can't handle the school bus. There's another example of where it can't handle the fire truck. So these are, and that bridge cost $1 million to repair it, and their whole budget for their whole county is $8 million. I mean, we have 159 counties here. It is not a good governance structure. So we have a lot of things, that are headwinds. We also, if we think the traffic is bad now, wait until we get the Port of Savannah deepened. That's a very good thing for our economy, but we're going to have even more tractor trailers coming through here to get that, to get the transport out of there. And about 80% of them have to come through Atlanta to even get out of there, and about 60% of the trucks who come through here have to stop because we are a big metropolitan area. So we really, there's a lot of moving parts, but we are working very hard to try to get people to wake up and understand that we've got to have some kind of revenue to fix it, and that we've got to have a bigger plan because we need at least $1 billion a year. I mean, really, to start saying we have a plan. I'll make one more comment on this. We have companies with whom we compete with, let's say again, Dallas, Houston, et cetera, to come here. And what they tell us is, we love Atlanta. We don't like your traffic, but we don't like the traffic in, again, Dallas, Houston, Austin, LA, you name it. But the difference between everybody else and you guys is at least they have a plan for transportation. We're sitting here today without a plan. And that does not play well when you're trying to get people to move here, to live here, and to bring their businesses here.
I have a question. So when you said you joined Arby's and to energize the workforce, you turn your focus to child hunger. What were some steps that you took at Church's Chicken to turn around the brand?
Well, at Church's, it's interesting because the Church's was really probably one of the first, if not the first. It's a brand that's actually older than I am, believe it or not, so you can get the drift there. So it was one of the first brands that went into the inner city years and years and years ago. And so our stores, our restaurants tended to be in very low-income areas. And we served, a really good product. It was fresh chicken, freshly fried, some vegetables. Yes, most of the vegetables were fried. Sometimes we used to joke around, even the coleslaw is going to be fried if we don't watch out. But we really had real food. It wasn't a hard, squished out hamburger patty that doesn't even feel like any kind of, real protein anymore. It was real pieces of chicken that were filling. It came in serving boxes that you can take home and put down and have a meal with your family, not just something individual. So, and it was for a very, very good price. And so we had a lot of pride and passion in those inner city neighborhoods about serving a really good meal for a really good price. And we also had a lot of passion around having jobs in those inner cities because a lot of those places were definitely food deserts in terms of grocery stores and things that we've all heard that do drive some of the food insecurity. But we were able to provide jobs there, and we felt like really a good meal. And the other thing that we were proud of is that our franchisee base at Church's was the most diverse of any other brand. Now, McDonald's, very diverse, and they had tons more of restaurants, but just on a general basis, we had a more diverse franchisee base. And there's a guy, and I always use him as an example when I talk about Church's. He started out in Jacksonville, Florida as a fry cook in 1968, and today he is a multi-millionaire, and he has created so much wealth for him and his family. He was, high school dropout, African-American guy, and we just had a lot of pride around that. And what we did for Church's, for our special connection to the community, was build habitat houses, because many of our consumers and many of our workers needed a habitat house. So we, that one, it's such a different brand in terms of getting pride around what you were doing than the Arby's brand. Arby's really was kind of searching for its soul a little bit, whereas Church's, we knew what it was. We just needed to revitalize it and bring it out. But we were all very proud of what we did there.
Hala, thanks for coming to Georgia Tech today. Thank you very much.